Hello, this is my tutorial, or I'm Drew Ruck. This is my tutorial for the neurotransmitter, or NT pathways in the brain. And hopefully this will help you remember it. Never mind, you don't want to know how many takes I've had. Um, the pathways all start at the same place and they go to different parts of the brain. This is a very important sort of first thing to remember about this. And this really threw me off at first because I felt like they're all going to the same parts of the brain, as you can clearly see in sort of these pictures. But what's important to remember is even though they're running through similar parts of the brain, sort of their target destinations are all different. So it's like if there's a row of targets and they're all sort of clumped together, they still have one specific target they're aiming for, even though the targets may be near each other. So even though this one goes to what looks to be this area of the brain, it's going to a different target in that area of the brain than, say, this one. And I also want to just apologize in advance for the slightly grainy photos. This was the only thing I could find online and felt like it was still better than a photo of my book. So first, we have the cholinergic pathway. This pathway transmits acetylcholine. Um, I like to think of this one as the one that wants to be different, because in a lot of ways this pathway is different from the other pathways, as we'll see further on. Such as, for example, it starts in one spot and splits up immediately. Many of the other or all the other pathways we'll be looking at actually, start at two spots and then stay largely together. So that part makes this one different, and also just how different its name is from what it actually transports. Threw me off as well at first. So this one starts at the basal forebrain, and that's where sort of all the pathways start. And it goes to the cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, which is three different spots, which is more than many of the other pathways go to. So it transmits acetylcholine. And how I like to remember this one is that the home base of it is in the basal forebrain, and it transmits acetyl choline to the amygdala, cortex, and hippocampus, with like acetyl A, amygdala, choline, CH, cortex, hippocampus. And I'll try to have something like this for every slide, just because hopefully how I remember it will help you. It might not, because everybody remembers things differently, but these will be the little word things I have been using to remember stuff. So next up is the dopaminergic pathway. So this one transports dopamine. And this one and the rest of the pathways from here on split in two right at the beginning. So each one was sort of, it's one pathway of the dopaminergic pathway. Dopaminergic pathway. Sorry, my bad. I've said that word a few times, but it always messes me up. So this one has first off the mesolimbicortical pathway, which goes to the ventral tegmental area, or goes from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens and the cortex. And it also has the medial striatal pathway, which goes from the substantia nigra to the basal ganglia. So this one I definitely had difficulty remembering just because it's such large, difficult to pronounce words. But what's kind of been helping me is the mesolimbocortical goes to the limbic system and the cortex. The limbic system in the book is talked about as being similar to the accumbens. Um, and also it splits off, sort of looking like limbs, like little arms or something. So that's how I like to remember it. And then limbo and cortical are both in the word. And then the other one is the medial striatal. And I like to think of this one as going straight to the basal ganglia. And straight is in the word, and it just goes straight there. So next up is the noradrenergic pathway. So this one transports norepinephrine, norepinephrine, and this one goes from the locus coeruleus to the forebrain, or from the lateral tegmental area to the brainstem and spinal cord. So how I like to remember sort of the pathways that this one takes is that the locus coeruleus is in the core of your brain and goes to the forebrain, since it's sort of more central than kind of this other part, and it goes to the forebrain, and sort of like your brain sort of has brain in the core of the word. So the coeruleus goes to sort of the more core part of your brain. Um, and then the lateral tegmental area is sort of closer to the edge, so it's more of like a lateral part of your brain, as sort of linking the words, and then this goes to the spinal cord and brainstem, or brainstem and spinal cord, and sort of those are more, lateral, less central parts of your brain. So lateral tegmental to the less central parts of your brain, and then the coeruleus part of your brain, or that's how I've been pronouncing this part, coeruleus, um, goes to the more core part of your brain. Next up is the serotonergic pathways. So this one transports serotonin, sorry about that S, and it goes from the midbrain RAF nuclei to the forebrain, and from the brainstem RAF nuclei to the spinal cord. Uh, so this one, how I remember, is kind of dumb, but I read this word as RAF. I'm not sure if you're supposed to read it like that, and that's very similar to the word wrath, which serotonin is the sort of opposite of, because I always think of it as sort of being more the happy-go-lucky chemical in your brain, which is incorrect, but is just kind of my first thought that comes to mind. So if you say wake up one morning and you're full of wrath, you're unhappy to be awake, but then you see like sunlight and a bird, you'll become less wrathful. Sort of like how serotonin goes from the wrath part of your brain to the parts of your brain that aren't the wrath parts. Um, I don't know if that's at all useful to anyone else, but that's how I've been remembering it. And then it goes from the midbrain to the forebrain is the first one. And that one I think is pretty easy because it's brain to brain. And then the other one is brainstem to spinal cord. And those are sort of both more auxiliary parts of your brain. So it's brain to brain and then sort of less brain part to less brain part. So those were kind of the four main pathways and the paths they take and where they go from what. But there's a few other things that would also be good to remember. So in the order of like most transmitters to least transmitters, the ones with the most are the cholinergic and noradrenergic pathways. Then it's the dopaminergic, and then it's the serotonineric. Um, and that's just an important thing to know because dopamine and serotonin are both really important to your brain, but you have less of these receptors, or not receptors, pathways. Um, or neurons in these neuron pathways. Um, so damage to these can be really harmful, and also it's just kind of important to know that there's not as many of them, but they have so many connections. It still functions. And then a few of sort of the main functions of these things are norepinephrine is involved in like a lot of things like alertness, mood, and sexual behavior. Dopamine is involved with feelings of happiness and reward. But if the system breaks down, it can be linked to addiction and schizophrenia. So that's what I'm saying of like, there's not a lot of transmitters, so if they break down, things can go very wrong. And then serotonin is involved in a lot of behaviors actually. And then kind of three of the main ones are mood, vision, and sleep. And then acetylcholine plays an important role in neurotransmissions in the forebrain. So it's so important actually that breakdowns of it are linked to Alzheimer's. So it's just a really central part of neurotransmission in your brain. And yeah, that's everything important that I have for this. So yeah, thank you, and hope your peer reviews go well.